And with the present state of the economy, removal of subsidy, rising inflation, which has caused prices of goods and services to skyrocket, many people can no longer afford to buy fuel, resulting in fewer cars on the road and even forcing some individuals to embark on long walks to reach their destinations. The cost of living in Nigeria has, of course, increased, with the basic necessities becoming increasingly expensive. World partner and chief economist at PricewaterhouseCoopers, Dr. Andrew Nevin, is joining me via Zoom to assess the implications of this purported, of course, there's already an increase in the price of fuel and the ups and downs, the flip-flops around the electricity tariff. Dr. Nevin, thank you so much for joining me on the program. We appreciate this.
Tolo, it's always great to be with you, my brother.
Thank you so much. I went through a report by PwC saying that this could be a very good time for government to increase minimum wage from 30,000 naira and maybe to about 50,000 naira to help cushion the effect of all of these negatives. How does this come to you? Tell us more about this report.
Well, I think our view is minimum wage should be increased. I mean, the reality is prices have gone up, and we're not the only country that's had inflation, and other countries are going through the same decision making. But I mean, the people that you want to make sure you protect are the ones at the bottom of the pyramid, and they're going to be much better protected, particularly government workers, if they have an increase in minimum wage than the inefficient fuel subsidy. So, I mean, we could debate whether the number is 50,000, maybe 70,000. I'm probably not. I think the NLC, the trade unions wanted 200,000. That's probably not feasible, but we would definitely like to see a minimum wage increase, and just also to send a signal that the nation is prepared to take care of the people that are at the earning less. I mean, that's really, really critical. And it's, as I said, a much better way give them income than the foil subsidy, which was highly inefficient and essentially a system of corruption.
A good way to start. But many will say if that happens, there will be a big blow on inflation and, of course, expected figures as we move on in the year. What do you think? Purchasing power already is challenged at the moment.
Well, I mean, inflation is caused, in our view, primarily by two things in this country. One is insecurity, which creates real problems in the production of food and agricultural products. And when there's less production, there's the same amount of money and prices go up. So, I mean, when we say there's 22% inflation, I mean, the truth is anyone that goes to the market, like my wife does, and buys products, fantastic products here in Abuja, coming from Plateau State, coming from Kaduna State. But the price has gone up by a lot more than 22% or 50% over 2 years. It's gone up by 100%, 200% in some cases. And the major cause is insecurity. The second cause of inflation is the reduction in hydrocarbon volumes. I mean, we dropped below a million barrels a day. We were subsidizing 650,000. There has not been a kobo transferred from NNPC to the Federation account in over 18 months. Let me repeat that. There's not a kobo transfer from the Federation account from the NNPC to the Federation account in 18 months. And those things are the cause of inflation, because there hasn't been a transfer from the Federation account. The Naira has depreciated. So rather than talk about the inefficient foil subsidy causing more inflation, I don't know whether inflation is going to go up or go down. I mean, the World Bank economists came out and said it'll be deflationary in the medium term. But let's again focus on the fundamentals. If we can make some progress in security and make some progress on the volume of production of hydrocarbons, we'll see the exchange rate strengthen, particularly because people have more confidence in the country, and then we'll see inflation come down. The reason we're getting this inflation, of course, in foil is because it's priced at world prices. So, of course, if the dollar goes to the Naira goes to 770 to the dollar from 160 when I arrived, or maybe 128 when I arrived, you're going to have inflation. The only way to do it is address the fundamentals. So I don't see it as much to do with the subsidy. It has to do with these other issues. The issues being the insecurity in agriculture and the low production of hydrocarbons by the country.
Now, in over 18 years, the country has spent more than $30 billion on fuel subsidy payment. Now, practically, let's assume, what can we channel this kind of funds to, at least to, improve growth, improve development, of course, across the board? If we had channeled this 30 billion into some productive sources like education, like healthcare, like building capacity, schools and all of that, what positives do you see aside from paying it along the subsidy line for years as we've been used to?
Well, I mean, there's no successful no successful future for this country without investing in its young people. So those investments are primarily, as you said, education and health. And you said schools. I wouldn't think, I mean, obviously we need to have physical facilities for the students, but I think you need to think more about the spending on the teachers and having the things in the classroom to go on. I mean, this country, we often talk about recurring expenditures being wasteful. Of course, that's not true. Most of the expenditure in education is recurrent because you're paying the teachers, you're paying the professors. Most of the expenditure in healthcare is recurrent because you're paying the doctors, you're paying the nurses. And of course, if you buy pharmaceuticals, those are recurrent expenditures. So let's not have this false idea that only capital expenditure benefits it, but we should be investing in people. So think about what's happened in the last 18 months. We had a one-year ASU strike. So we had hundreds of thousands of young Nigerians losing at least a year of their education, tertiary education, a year of earning power, really discouraging, affecting their brain capital on that. And at the same time, we were subsidizing the consumption of foil, most of which goes to wealthier people. So, I mean, it's just an equation for not making any progress. And as you said, if we had that $30 billion channel into let's call it productive uses, education and health, we'd be much further ahead. So, there's nothing we can do about the past $30 billion, but we can now have started to do something about the future. And of course, in theory, we should very quickly see a flow from NMPC to the Federation account, and that should flow onto the states and the LGAs, because of course they get 24 and 20% of the Federation account. So we should see an immediate impact. I mean, there are teachers who are not being paid in this country because of the foil subsidy. There are pensioners not being paid in this country because of the foil subsidy. So with the removal of the foil subsidy, hopefully we can have the money channeled to where it's most useful for the development of Nigeria, which is particularly the young people in education and health.
There is expected to be high competition in the market with this removal of fuel subsidy, even across market structures. And even marketers are already saying it's possible some will have to merge to be able to continue in this market. Now, what do you think about that competition, and what will be the fallout after we get to that point where many expect that we start to see variation in the price? You know what I'm talking about, maybe a drop.
I understand, but let me start out by saying, I mean, I'm not a huge fan of the capitalist system overall. I think there are many flaws to the capitalist system, but it's a little bit like render unto Caesar what should be Caesar's, render unto God what should be God. In the case of PMS or petrol or kerosene, anything like that, the capitalist system works best. I mean, the government should have nothing to do with the allocation of who's importing, where they're sending it, what the price is. It will take care of itself. And I can tell you this from having also lived in country after country, and sometimes in Canada, the politicians stand up and say foil price is too high. Every time they do the study, they end up finding out it's a highly competitive market and the price is exactly where it should be. Exactly the same thing will play out here. Now, of course, you're going to end up with disparities in prices depending on where the depots are, depending on where the oil is produced. I mean, if the Kaduna refinery ever came on stream, we'd have a refined product close to Kaduna, close to Kano. Maybe the price there would be lower than it is in Lagos. I don't know. But this is something that is easily worked out by competitive forces on that. It's a commodity product. Everyone understands the specifications very well. Everyone understands the economics of it very well. It will simply take care of itself. And of course, the federal government and the state governments have so many issues to worry about. I mean, we can make a long list of those issues. One of the things I think that's important for success of the new administration is getting less things to worry about. So now we have something like PMS, which you don't even have to think about because the competitive forces will take care of itself. The government can simply say it's not our problem, and they can focus on education, they can focus on health, they can focus on insecurity.
Forex is very important when we talk about importing petroleum products. And at the moment, that market has been opened up. I know you're one of the advocates of that, saying that we need to open up that market. We've talked about this for some time. But now for importation of petroleum products, for the major marketers to be able to play in this market, do you think that there won't be that same flip-flop up and down or high and low, talking about the pricing of foreign exchange? What effect do you think opening up that market will have on fuel importation?
I mean, I think, of course, the exchange rate varies in every country. And even when it was in theory fixed, which it wasn't, but in theory fixed, of course, it was fixed to the US dollar. It varied against the euro, it varied against the pound, it varied against the Japanese yen. Everyone's exchange rate fluctuates. I mean, to the extent that we have a stronger economy, the exchange rate is going to get better, get stronger. The naira will get stronger. It will take pressure off inflation. We may even have deflation. I mean, in the case of the PMS, I mean, I don't think it matters that much. I mean, people understand if they're importing fuel or distributing fuel, they need to pay a world price. They're going to price it appropriately in the markets here. If you've got 5, 6 major players, it'll be a highly competitive market. It will kind of take care of itself. And people go to the pumps and they see the price changes. And it may change every week, it may change every month, it may change every few months. But I mean, this is something that people cope with all over the world. In the United States, oil prices as they move, the pump price moves as well. We'll have exactly the same situation in Nigeria.
At this moment, many analysts are saying that we need to start to drive investments or attract investments into the CNG and LPG space to augment issues around fuel subsidy removal. Do you agree to that?
Yeah, no. I mean, I think the government came out and said we're a gas country back in, I think, 2018. It was a very good strategy. CNG, I mean, for vehicles is a very good economic, given the price of oil around the world and the abundance of CNG. I mean, it's a very good economic policy. I'm not sure, to be honest, the government needs to do that much again about this because the economic forces are so strong for CNG. I mean, they're private sector actors that distribute CNG. They're private sector actors that know how to convert a car properly to CNG. That system will take off on its own. And if you're driving for Uber, you're going to figure out pretty quickly that if you pay a half or a third of the price for CNG, it's worth it making the investment to move your car over to CNG rather than petrol. So I mean, I think that would be fantastic, and we should be investing more in the gas infrastructure. And we have so much gas. I mean, not only do we have gas to export, so we're up to the 7th train on LNG, and of course, with the war in Ukraine, there's a lot more opportunity to export gas to Europe over the next decade. But we should also be using it internally, gas to power, but as you say, also compressed natural gas, not just for vehicles, but also for cooking.
Interesting stuff. Now, let's shift to another very important product, electricity. We are all preparing for the hike July 1st, but now NERC is saying no approval to this development. We don't know anything about this. There's been a message from NERC. But my question really to you would be, what is your reaction, or what are your thoughts around our pricing of electricity in this country? Distribution companies have always said they want cost-reflective tariff. How cost-reflective will it be considering the service that we have at the moment, Dr. Nevin?
Well, I think after a decade, we can safely say that the privatization was a complete disaster on every dimension. I mean, we're 10 years into this. I was in the country when the privatization happened. My own industry, as people know, is financial services. I didn't know much about, still don't know that much about the electricity market. It's privatization sounds like it must be better than NEPA. And of course, that hasn't turned out to be true. And there's been billions of dollars of subventions that have gone in. And you mentioned, I think, the World Bank earlier in your report. And the World Bank, too, has subsidized the system over the past decade, and it has not delivered a result. And I think people need to ask about it. The mass metering program turned out to be a source of corruption. The grid collapses regularly on that. So fundamentally, I think people should be looking for a different type of system. And we've advocated for some time that actually electricity should be a state matter because there's so many different technology decisions. And the scale of electricity production has really declined over the decades. I mean, I grew up near Niagara Falls. You have this idea of a big source of electricity, big grid on that. But that's no longer how the world works. And also, given the highly distributed nature of Nigeria and many rural communities, the only way they're going to get electricity is if it's delivered in situ, which essentially in most cases means solar, in some cases gas, in some cases waste power. But whatever the system is, you can figure it out much better at the state level than the national level. And I think that these 10 years of disasters in the power industry should really be a cause for thinking. Now, of course, one of the last acts in His Excellency President Buhari's regime was to move electricity from the exclusive list to the concurrent list. So now it is a bit of a state issue. NERC has come out and said, if I understand correctly, in cases where a state sets up its own electricity regulator, it will step away from the regulation of electricity. And that I would like to see the grid infrastructure given over to the states, and the states can figure it out at a local level. Now, of course, it's going to have to be cost reflective. There may be some cross subsidization for the bottom of the pyramid. I mean, that's how they do it in India. But this really can be figured out at the local level. I think we've learned from experience in Nigeria, if we try to have a national program of these subsidies, all we're going to end up with is corruption and diversion. And I think the message from the federal government to the state should be, look, you have lots of smart people in your state. You have lots of smart commissioners, I hope, and you figure out the electricity. And then you might say, well, how do you coordinate? Well, that's easily done. I mean, in India, it's a state matter. In the United States, it's a state matter. In Canada, it's a state matter. There's no national body regulating or coordinating these issues in these countries. All that happens is you get together with your neighboring states and figure out, when you wheel power, how you're going to coordinate that. I mean, so Ontario wheels power to New York, Quebec wheels power to New York. Sometimes it goes from New York to Ontario, depending on the production, the generation of power. And states figure it out. So I think it'll be much better done at a local level, particularly, as I said, in our environment where we have new technologies, in particular the solar technology, which is really a very local issue. So in terms of the existing tariff, I think it's a bit of a distraction, and I really hope the new administration doesn't focus on trying to extend the existing system, which is clearly broken. I mean, we can't have a system where the DISCOs and the GENCOs don't receive enough to operate, which means it has to be cost reflective in some way. We can't have a system where the grid collapses all the time on that. And of course, we can't have a system that's so unreliable, because then the person then has to go out and say, even if the electricity tariff was lower than cost reflective, it's still not a very good deal for the consumer, and particularly for the business, because you can't run a factory on intermittent power. You then have to have the backup power. So you go to all the expense of building that backup power system on that. And once you have that, you might as well use the backup power system, because it's going to be more reliable on that. So for all those reasons, we really see it as something that the federal government should be saying, states, you figure it out. If you want power, you sort out how to power. There's so many solar technologies. There's so many groups bringing out solar technologies. There's so many programs from around the world to support the rollout of solar technologies to rural communities. Take advantage of those. The federal government has shown itself utterly incapable of managing the electricity system in Nigeria.
Brilliant submission as usual. Dr. Andrew Nevin, thank you so much. Chief Economist, Partner, PricewaterhouseCoopers. Thank you for spending your afternoon with us. Well, I wish you happy holidays. You'll be enjoying your holidays, the Muslim celebration.
Thank you, Tola. Great to see you.